Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos. This is called Kansas Troubles. It finishes at 12 inches. It looks like a very complicated block, but we just have triangles and a few squares in here. And we'll just take it one step at a time and work on it. Here is the diagram. Here are 4 blocks set block to block. I've seen this done with different shades of blue, and it was really a striking quilt, but of course I always love the scrappy quilts. And this is a 2x2 grid, so each unit is the same in each grid, and each unit finishes at 6 inches because this is a 12-inch block, so you have 6 plus 6 is 12. Here are the patches. The first patch A is a 1.5 inch finished half square triangle. We cut 2 3/8 inch squares, cut them in half once diagonally for 2 patches. For the medium fabric, we need 24 patches. And for the background fabric, we need 16 assorted patches. Here are the AccuQuilt dies that will cut this shape. And I'll go over the cutting instructions for rotary cutting. Patch B is a 1.5 inch finished square. We cut 2-inch squares, and we'll need 4 assorted patches for patch B. In the diagram here, I used assorted background fabrics, low volume prints, but in my demo, I'm using 1 print. Patch C is a 6-inch finished half square triangle. We cut a 6 7/8 inch square, cut it in half once on the diagonal for 2 patches. And we'll need 4 assorted patches for the background. Here are the AccuQuilt dies. And patch D is a 3-inch finished half square triangle. We cut 3 7/8 inch squares, cut them in half once on the diagonal for 2 patches. And we'll need 4 patches of the dark fabric. And here are the AccuQuilt dies. These instructions use the 2 at a time method to make 16 half square triangles. If you want to make your 16 half square triangles any other way, go right ahead. There's plenty of ways you can make half square triangles. We just need 16 1.5 inch finished half square triangles. All seams are scant 1/4 inch except for AccuQuilt. If you're using AccuQuilt, those dies are designed for a true 1/4 inch seam. And always make a test block before cutting multiple blocks. And I like to make a test block not only so I understand the instructions, but sometimes I just won't like how the block is constructed, and I don't want to do the quilt if I have to construct it some weird kind of crazy way. So I always make a test block if I'm going to do a lot of blocks for a quilt. All right, so here's the cutting instructions, and this is the medium fabric. And we have 2 different patch A's we're going to cut. The first one, we're going to cut 8 2 3/4 inch squares for half square triangles 2 at a time. Or you can cut each square in half once diagonally for 16 patches. So there's that part. This part is for the half square triangles. These 2 are half square triangles, and these 2 are half square triangles. Over here on the edges, we have just a plain triangle, and over here too. So we have 2 in this unit and 2 in the other units. That makes 8. So the first part, the 2 at a time half square triangles, makes these full half square triangles. The second part, the 4, cut 4 at 2 3/8 inch squares, cut each one in half once diagonally for 8 patches. That is these 2 patches here, the A patches there. So you have your squares. If you want to do 2 at a time half square triangles, then you have your 8 patches that you need for the small triangles. For the background fabric, we have our A patch, and this is going to be matched with the half square triangles here. So we'll cut 8 2 3/8 inch squares for the half square triangles 2 at a time, or cut each square in half once diagonally for 16 patches. So whatever you did up here for the medium fabric, do the same thing for the background fabric because these will be matched together. Patch B, we cut 4 2-inch squares. And these are these little patches right here in the corner. There are 4 of them. And for the C patch, we cut 2 6 7/8 inch squares, cut each in half diagonally once for 4 patches. And this is the large triangle here, those 4. Okay? And for the dark fabric, patch D, we cut 2 3 7/8 inch squares, cut each one in half diagonally once for 4 patches. And this is the triangle right here, the dark triangle in the 4 grid spaces. We're going to look at the fabrics next. The first thing we'll look at are the squares or the patches that we use to make the half square triangles. And there are a total of 16 half square triangles. I'm going to use the 2 at a time method, so we have 8 squares of each fabric, and when we make the half square triangles, we'll have 16. You might have cut 16 patches of each of these. We'll just sew those together and you'll have your 16 half square triangles. For the next part, we're going to sew these triangles on the edges, these A patches that we cut into triangles. We cut 8 of them, and we'll sew those to the half square triangles. And these are the little triangles we cut that will go on the edges. Also on the little corners, here are the 2-inch squares we cut that go on the little corners of each unit. Right here, 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 and here. Those are the squares. And finally we have our very large triangle, the background triangle, and then the smaller triangle that goes like this. And then our half square triangles will fill in here and here. And here we are at step 1. You'll take your 16 total squares or your 32 patches, and you'll make 16 half square triangles. If you're not familiar with the 2 at a time method, stay tuned for a short tutorial that shows you how. On the back side of the light fabric, we're going to draw a diagonal line, put the fabrics together, right sides together, and we're going to stitch on either side of the diagonal line. Here is the diagonal line drawn, and then the stitching on both sides. Now we cut this in half along the diagonal line. Then we have our 2 half square triangles. Press the seams open and cut off the nubs. All of our half square triangles are done, and we're going to sew them together in 2 different groups. This is one, and this is another. And we're looking at step 2 here. We want 4 sets like this and 4 sets like that. So you just stitch the 2 together and press the seams open. For step 3, we're going to take the A patches and sew them on one side of each of these. So we just look at our step 3 and follow the diagram to see how to sew it on. So for this one, the patch goes like this, and for this one, the patch goes like this. Just follow the diagram. To stitch this, you know you want to line up this edge because that's what's straight across. Flip this over and you match the top and the side. Stitch scant 1/4 inch, and if you're using AccuQuilt, you stitch a true 1/4 inch. Do the same thing on this side. Flip it over, match the top part and the side, stitch 1/4 inch, and press the seams open, and do that for all of these sets. Now we move to step 4. The first thing we're going to do is sew the square onto this unit. Then we'll sew first this side together, then this side. I'm going to leave this here so we can see what's going on. This is the triangle that will go like this. And the first thing we'll do is put the square, sew the square onto this one and press your seam open. Here I've already done this. So you can see how this is going to look. From the diagram, it shows we do this one first, So this is the edge we want to match. Flip this over, match this top edge and the side, and you'll see this little, the bottom triangle pokes out a little bit and it makes this little V. If you start or end your stitching in that V, you'll get a nice straight line. Here you can see the stitching comes down and goes right into this angle here, this 90-degree angle. When you open this up, then press the seam, it'll be a nice straight line. And here it is pressed. It's pressed open. So I'm going to just cut this off. And you see that I have a nice straight edge here. Then the next thing we'll do is sew this on top. And you'll want to start and stop the same way over here so you'll get the nice straight edge. Flip this over. You'll need to match the side, the top, and this seam line here. And then you'll have your little 90-degree angle that you'll want to stop or start stitching in. And here is this little nub. You'll need to cut that off. And there you have your nice big triangle. The next thing you'll do is stitch these two together. And then you'll have your one unit done. Flip this over, match all three sides as best as you can. If they don't match up, just make sure they're flat. It'll come up a little bit like it is here, and that's okay. It matches pretty much all the way around. Let's flip this over. See, this is coming out a little bit here, and what I do is just kind of even it out. Make it even a little bit. Looks like the top one is just slightly bigger, so I'm just going to even it out as much as I can, and then I'm going to sew 1/4 of an inch, scant 1/4 of an inch. And here's the unit all done. At this point, this should measure 6.5 inches. So go ahead and finish the other 3 units like this, then we'll put the block together. I wanted to show you that these blocks can easily get wonky. That's why your scant 1/4 inch helps you. Let me move this out of the way. I've got this 6.5 inch ruler on here, and I've got the diagonal line along this seam line. And you can see up here, it comes out a little bit. That needs to be trimmed. Of course, the nubs need to be trimmed off. This edge over here is pretty straight. This edge over here is a different story. That's probably at least 1/8 of an inch here and down here, and then it stops here. When you trim this, don't get too crazy. Try to leave your ruler on top and look at all 4 sides. This side is not as bad because there are no points here to cut off. So this is okay. The diagonal line falls pretty well, but over here we need to look at our points on our triangles, especially these points right here. This isn't exactly a 1/4 inch, but if we're stitching a scant 1/4 inch, that's no problem. And right here too, it's very close. But then you have this extra. So when you're happy with all 4 sides, be sure to look at all 4 sides. Here our 1/4 inch on these points is perfect. But there's a little bit of trimming that needs to be done. So I'm going to just trim this off and make it a really nice, pretty 6.5 inch block. So just do this. And I'm not going to trim this side because it's pretty good. Now, so we have these little things that we've trimmed off. And that's not too bad. So I guess my point is, if you're trimming, or sometimes people call it squaring up, you're not going to be able to square up anything. You trim it to make it fit, because if this is out of whack, it's not going to be square, but you can make it as even as you can and the size you need it to be. Then later when you're piecing them together, you can sort of fudge these points. If they have to match, then you won't have a full 1/4 inch here, and that's okay. You have enough fabric here to stitch that other side together. So I'm going to finish trimming these other 2 units, and then we're just going to lay them out into the block. Now we just follow our diagram and lay the block out. It's a big pinwheel. Now it doesn't look too bad on the camera, but in real life, this background is a little bit too dark, I should say, or the triangle fabric is not dark enough. There's not a good enough contrast on here. I'm happy that it's done, but this is one of the reasons why I do test blocks. Not only for the piecing, to see how I like the piecing, but also to see how the fabrics go. If I had cut up an entire quilt using these colors, I would be very upset because it's okay, but it's not something that I want a whole quilt looking like. So I'll sew these 2 together and these 2, press the seams, and sew the rows together. So here's the block. I had some more comments on this. Overall, I'm pretty pleased with the piecing. There are a few points that are cut off a little bit in some places. Next time I do this block, I'm going to use my AccuQuilt. If you have AccuQuilt, I suggest using that, or if you have triangle papers. So you'll have these half square triangles a little bit more accurate because there's so many of them. There's the half square triangles, and then there are the small little triangles, the 8 pieces, that there's a lot of opportunities to get a little wonky. But overall, I'm pleased with it. This is the first time I've pieced one of these blocks, and I would do the contrasting fabrics, and then I would do the triangle papers or the AccuQuilt. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and while you're at it, click the bell to be notified of future videos.